Welcome back. I'm Science Editor Brian Hackney. We're above Point Reyes, but Point Reyes didn't always used to be below us. Point Reyes moved up from where it was formed in Monterey. It's now anchored to West Marin. And those rocks near Palo Alto, they used to be above Santa Cruz.
So this has been transported up here by the San Andreas?
By the San Andreas Fault, that's correct.
This movement happens in one of two ways, so dramatically you'll never forget it, or so slowly that nobody even noticed it until 1956. See, creep on a fault is actually a very rare thing. So let's head south to San Benito County and drink a toast to the place where creep on a fault was first discovered.
That is wonderful.
It all began at the DeRose Vineyard, 10 miles south of Hollister. Of all the places to pick a century ago, somebody managed to put the building down right on top of the San Andreas Fault.
Oh my God, is that where the fault's from?
It's where they first discovered that faults creep.
Yeah, that's where the fault line runs, right through the building.
Back in the 50s, they knew something weird was going on here.
That wall was attached to that wall.
Doorways were bent. The floor was fractured. The ditches outside didn't line up.
This is the doorway from the Pacific Plate. You step through it, and you're on the North American Plate. And you always tell people what?
It's not my fault.
Slowly but surely, the two halves of the building are sliding apart. Pat DeRose had to cut rebar to separate the walls.
And when I got to the last piece, everybody handed me the torch and said, "You're the boss, you cut it." Okay?
So the two halves of the winery warehouse are free to go their own separate way. And at the back of the building, the San Andreas has kicked through and it heads north. But it gets complicated because this kind of creep is now transferred on two faults. The Calaveras emerges from the hills east of here. It heads north, and the Calaveras is tearing apart a town more quickly than anywhere else in the world. I know. I was born there. I grew up at this fork in the seismic road in Hollister. My biggest fear wasn't being killed by a quake, but being killed by my sisters. Little did I know I lived in the creep capital of the world. Hello, excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am? Ma'am? Do you know that the Calaveras Fault is just blocks from here?
No,
Do you
I
not?
didn't know that. God, thanks for telling me.
Mom.
Oh, quit it, Brian.
Let's go ask the, now let's go ask your mother.
later.
Graham, do you know there's an earthquake fault right out here?
No, I gotta move.
Yeah.
Take me back with you. I don't want to be on the earthquake fault.
The Calaveras slices Hollister, and no town is being ripped more quickly than it is here. Wow. That's stunning. Look at this, Dad. This is my dad, by the way. Look.
Hi.
Come here. Look at the offset in that sidewalk on 6th Street. Look at how much the curb has been split. Look at that. Did you know?
I remember when it was a lot straighter than it is now.
Well, it is neat because it's very special. It's really rare in the world. You know, that sidewalk we saw was from 1911, and so we have a long period, you know, that we actually can see the change.
You can follow the fault out of town by following these sag ponds, low points formed by the Calaveras. The ponds lead to the fastest moving part of any fault in the Bay Area.
We're emerging, shall I signal?
Now we're in the hills east of Gilroy. So the fault's right out here.
Yeah, it follows that pond to this pond.
There's a reason these things span the Calaveras here.
It's creeping 14 or 15 millimeters a year. That's a little over half an inch a year.
That is faster than anywhere in the Hayward Fault.
Yeah, definitely.
So fast, the geologists keep an eye on it with these. The USGS set down these concrete markers in a perfectly straight line right across the fault in 1972. And Danny and Heidi and I are standing on the markers. Except Danny's not standing exactly on his marker. Danny, take a step on your marker. He's on the other side of the fault. And that's how far north it's moved since 1972, about 17 inches north. We head along the part of the fault that produced a string of quakes in the 80s.
The northern Calaveras fault from Calaveras Reservoir to Danville can produce large earthquakes.
Like how large is large?
Probably a 7.
Wow. Up through Sunol Valley, cross 580 near the 680 interchange, and arrive in Dublin.
We're at the intersection of Foothill Boulevard and Acosta, and now we're here on the map. This is where we're basically pretty much where the fault is, and the map shows the fault goes right through that. Are you aware of the fact that the Calaveras fault goes through the building?
No, not at all.
But they are aware of the periodic quake swarms that rattle the San Ramon Valley and lift up Mount Diablo.
That's being uplifted 2-3 millimeters per year. It's going up.
And to show you how close the fault is to a lot of houses, Keith and I, wave Keith, Keith and I are standing here on top of a hill lifted up by the Calaveras fault. And look at how close these houses are to it. Did you know the fault was that close?
No, I didn't.
Really?
I knew it was close, but not in my backyard practically.
Would you have a problem with living in one of those houses that close to a fault?
Well, as a geologist, it'd be great. I'd get a front row seat. I'd be the first one on the rupture.
And it all happens because of lava that's squeezed out at the bottom of the ocean, moves plates around, the plates collide with the continent, raise mountains, breed faults. It's that movement on a massive scale that makes strike-slip faults like the San Andreas so rare, because they eat themselves. After all, everything west of the San Andreas fault system is heading north for a watery, then fiery grave in the Alaska Trench. So goodbye, San Francisco. Goodbye, San Jose. Goodbye, Los Angeles. California rose like Atlantis from the bottom of the ocean, and to the bottom of the ocean it's destined to return, one small step at a time. We'll return too, after a break. It was March 11th, 1933. Camera and crew were on the Paramount lot to film International House. It was a comedy starring W.C. Fields. They were rolling on one of his scenes as the second deadliest quake in California history struck.
46, take 1.
Action!
Young man, you probably saved my life. Now what can I do for you?
Take us to Shanghai.
Shanghai?
Yeah. What's the matter?
Earthquake. Take your time, folks. Now, everybody walk easy. It's all right now. It's all right. All right, okay.
In 20 seconds, 115 were dead, almost all of them killed in old brick buildings. It's been a problem from 1933 in Long Beach to 1989 in Loma Prieta.
It's the buildings that kill. It's the buildings that cause the worst effects.
This is a dormitory.
Peter Yanev has traveled the globe trying to make buildings safer.
This is one way of doing it. It's a very efficient way of doing it, not necessarily the prettiest. These are the older, large buildings. Lots of people live in them, built without any earthquake regulations or minimal regulations going back to the 20s and 30s. I think if they're concrete buildings, they represent some of the worst risks in San Francisco and in California.
Hard to imagine what happened in Kobe, Japan could happen here. But they're on top of a fault, just like we're on top of a fault. The difference is, theirs snapped.
If Kobe taught me one thing, that is that in a few seconds you can lose half of the value of a city.
We saw buildings pancake. We saw buildings collapse catastrophically and kill not 1 or 2 lives, but thousands of lives.
That has happened in every large earthquake throughout the world, and these buildings are not, some of them, are not any better than the ones I have seen collapse in Japan, in the Philippines, in Southern California, and elsewhere.
Buildings are the deadliest problem, but they won't be the only problem in a big quake.
Where would I least want to be? I wouldn't want to be in the tube underneath San Francisco Bay on BART.
A magnitude 7 could wipe out parts of BART for a long time.
How long could BART be down following such an earthquake?
A minimum for a major earthquake with no retrofit to be 2 to 3 years.
These elevated sections of track just aren't strong enough.
We'll have broken piling, we'll have structures leaning. BART is doing everything we can to identify those risks and to fix them.
Serious damage on the Bay Bridge.
You'll be glad to know the extra bucks to cross the bridge have paid off.
1989 was a wake-up call that let us know that we needed to go farther. We've got the risk way below what it was 15 years ago.
Let's hope so. After all, while the Golden Gate Bridge did all right, the Bay Bridge was almost brought down by a magnitude 6.9 that was centered almost 60 miles away.
Now, if we had the 89 quake near San Francisco instead of way south of here, you would have a completely different earthquake and a lot of buildings would have collapsed.
It's certainly possible to retrofit old concrete structures like this one, but there are no requirements to do anything about those old concrete buildings.
It makes no sense to me because we have the Golden Gate Bridge. We're strengthening it currently. It's built in the 30s. On the other side, we have the Bay Bridge, also built in the 30s. We're strengthening it. So the question then is, why aren't we strengthening some of the dangerous 1930s buildings with high occupancies?
It's a good question, especially because seismologists believe that quake activity is becoming more robust in the Bay Area. And as David Schwartz pointed out, we are the boundary between the Pacific Plate to the west and the North American Plate to the east.
The plates are moving past each other at about 48 millimeters a year, 2 inches or so. That movement, which seems very small, and it is divided onto the different faults. Now, if you take 200 years or 300 years between these large earthquakes, you can see that little few millimeters a year builds up, continues to increase. So finally, after 250 years on the Rogers Creek Fault, you've built up 2 meters or 6 feet of slip.
Boom. Boom.
Now, we're sitting here in 2004. The last really great earthquake was in 1906. But if you look at the history of earthquakes in the 20th century, and you compare it to what happened in the 1800s, there is no comparison. The 20th century was quiet. 1906 was so big, it punctured the region. It let all the stress out. It relaxed the crust, essentially turned the seismicity off. So we went through the 20th century, all of the infrastructure developed, the population increased, and it was seismically a quiet time.
There is no written record of California quakes before 1776, but there is a record in the geology. It shows that 300 years ago, the Bay Area was regularly shaken by large quakes.
What happened during that period of time is what lies out ahead of us. Starting sometime in the late 1600s, the Southern Hayward Fault, the Northern Hayward Fault, the Rogers Creek Fault, the San Gregorio Fault, and possibly the Northern Concord Fault all had earthquakes. We're estimating magnitude 7 or larger. And all of these faults have to fail. They have to fail because they have in the past. They've been slowed down because of the effect of 1906. Many of us think that that effect now has sort of waned, it has worn off. The plates have sort of re-energized themselves, they're pushing again. We may just reach a point where one of these big faults like the Hayward or the Rogers Creek is ready, and poof, it's just going to go.
It's California. Earthquakes are fun.
And people say, oh, I've lived in the Bay Area all my life. I know earthquakes. I've felt big earthquakes.
We've gone through about 3 or 4 big major earthquakes, and houses have really stood up pretty well.
Loma Prieta was just a little taste. People haven't felt anything yet.